In the silent dance between desire and power, there exists a truth so profound that it has remained hidden in plain sight for centuries. What if I told you that the greatest minds in psychology, from Jung to modern neuroscientists, have uncovered the exact mechanism that triggers unstoppable devotion in the male psyche? This isn't about manipulation or games. It's about understanding the primal architecture of desire itself. The most magnetic women in history instinctively grasped this knowledge. They understood that a man's pursuit isn't driven by what he easily obtains, but by what challenges his very essence. They knew how to touch that vulnerable space between a man's ego and his shadow, creating not just attraction, but something far more powerful: obsession. Today, I unveil the psychological alchemy that transforms casual interest into undying devotion, a science-backed revelation that explains why certain interactions create deep, lasting bonds, and the precise psychological triggers that activate a man's deepest devotion. What you're about to discover will fundamentally alter how you understand relationships, not through tricks or deception, but through a profound understanding of the masculine soul in its most authentic form. Are you ready to possess what might be the most transformative knowledge about love that exists? Have you noticed that the more you chase a man, the less he values you? The truth is that there's a secret kept for centuries in the depths of male psychology that few women know. A secret capable of making a man fall madly in love with you, even when before he seemed completely uninterested. Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychoanalysts in history, revealed in his studies of the collective unconscious that every man carries within himself a primordial wound. A wound that, when touched in the right way, awakens in him an almost obsessive need to prove his worth. And that's exactly what I'm going to teach you today. Imagine being able to awaken in the man you desire, a passion so intense that he couldn't imagine his life without you again. Imagine him thinking about you all day, sending you messages, desiring your attention, your time, your presence. What I'm about to share with you isn't simply a trick or technique. It's an ancestral knowledge about the masculine soul, about what truly moves a man beyond reason. It's about how to access the deepest layers of the masculine ego, not to hurt it cruelly, but to awaken in him the warrior, the protector, the devoted lover who wants to prove his worth to the woman he loves. Many women waste years trying to conquer or reconquer a man using strategies that simply don't work. They offer everything, give all their love, all their dedication, and receive crumbs in return. And do you know why? Because they're completely ignoring how the male mind really works. Modern neuroscience has finally confirmed what Jung knew decades ago. The male brain is programmed to value that which it needs to conquer, that which represents a challenge to his identity as a man. When you understand this, truly understand it, you have in your hands the power to completely transform the way men respond to you. What you're going to learn today is something that the most magnetic and irresistible women in history always knew intuitively. Cleopatra, Marilyn Monroe, the great seductresses of all eras. They all instinctively understood this truth about the male ego. Get ready, because after this video you will never see relationships the same way again. The way you interact with men will change forever. And that man in particular, the one who occupies your thoughts, will never be the same after you apply what I'm about to reveal to you. What I'm about to share with you began more than a century ago, when Jung, after breaking with his mentor Freud, immersed himself in the depths of the collective unconscious. Jung discovered that beyond the ego, the conscious part of our psyche, there exists a much more complex structure that governs our deepest desires. To truly understand how to hurt a man's ego in a way that awakens his love, we first need to understand what Jung called the shadow, that part of the man that he hides even from himself. The vulnerable part that fears not being enough, not being valued, not being admired. Have you noticed how some men can seem very confident on the outside, but inside they carry deep insecurities? This is the duality of the male psyche that Jung mapped in his studies. And it's exactly in this duality where resides the power to awaken an obsessive love in a man. Let me tell you a story. One of my clients, Jennifer, was completely in love with a man who seemed not to notice her existence. She did everything for him, always available, always attentive, always ready to help. And the more she dedicated herself, the less interest he showed. It seemed like a cruel irony of fate. When Jennifer came to me, desperate and heartbroken, I revealed to her this same secret that I'm now sharing with you. I explained to her that the male brain, according to modern neuroscience, produces higher levels of dopamine, the neurotransmitter of pleasure and reward, when facing a challenge. When something is too easy to obtain, the male brain simply doesn't value it. But pay attention. I'm not talking about childish games or manipulation. I'm talking about understanding the true nature of the sacred masculine. That energy that Jung identified as the driving force behind men's behavior. That energy constantly seeks to prove its worth, to conquer and overcome obstacles. The first thing I taught Jennifer was the Jungian concept of anima, the feminine part that exists within every man. This part profoundly influences how he relates to the women in his life. When a man projects his anima onto a woman, he essentially transforms her into an almost divine figure within his psyche. That's the basis of obsessive love, of overwhelming passion, and how to get him to project his anima onto you. This is where the concept of hurting the ego in a sacred and transformative way comes in. We're not talking about humiliation or cruelty. We're talking about touching that sensitive point that forces him to prove his worth to himself through you. Jung discovered that when a man is subtly challenged by a woman he admires, when his sense of competence and values is questioned in a mild way, something magical happens in his psyche. He enters a state that we could call hypnosis of the heart, a state in which conquering the love and admiration of that woman becomes the most important thing in his life. I'm going to share with you 3 ancestral secrets about how to activate this state in the male mind. 3 secrets that transformed the love life of Jennifer and hundreds of other women who applied this knowledge. The first secret is what I call the mirror of the soul. Jung spoke of how a man seeks to see his best version reflected in the eyes of the woman he loves. When you show a man that you can see his potential, but that potential has not yet been fully realized, you create a sacred tension in his soul. He begins to want to prove to himself and to you that he is capable of becoming that extraordinary man that you glimpsed. This doesn't mean criticizing him openly. It's much more subtle and powerful. It's showing that you deeply believe in him, but that you know he can go further. It's a look that says, I know who you can become, instead of, I accept you as you are. This subtle distinction is absolutely transformative. The second secret is the paradox of presence. Neuroscience shows us that the male brain is programmed to seek what is intermittent, not what is constant. That's why gambling is so addictive. The unpredictable reward creates a state of anticipation that releases much more dopamine than a guaranteed reward. When you're always available, always present, always offering your love unconditionally, the male brain, however unfair it may seem, begins to produce less dopamine in your presence. You become predictable, secure, and sadly, what is secure is rarely valued at a deep level in the primitive brain. The paradox of presence teaches that you should be like the moon, present but in phases, visible but mysterious, accessible but not completely possessed. This doesn't mean being false or playing cruel games. It means honoring your own life, your own mysteries, your own sacred path. When you do that, you wound the man's ego in a way that makes him want to prove that he deserves to have you completely. And finally, the third secret that Jung would call the confrontation with the shadow. Every man has deep fears that he hides. The fear of not being respected, not being enough, being abandoned. When you, with compassion and wisdom, touch those fears, not to exploit them, but to offer him the opportunity to transcend them, you create a connection that goes far beyond physical attraction or superficial compatibility. The deepest type of ego wound is one that offers healing. It's as if you said without words, "I see your shadows, your fears, your dark parts, and yet I choose to see the light in you." This is a transformative power that few women know or use. Returning to Jennifer's story, when she began to apply these 3 secrets, the change was almost immediate. The man who barely noticed her existence began to constantly seek her out. Messages that previously took days to be answered now arrived in minutes. He began to want to prove his worth to her in every possible way. In less than 3 months, he was completely in love. And most importantly, it wasn't a superficial love or based on games. It was a deep love. A love that was born because Jennifer helped him confront his own shadows and grow as a man. This is the power of Jungian psychology applied to love. This is the power of truly understanding the depths of the masculine soul. This is the power that I am now placing in your hands. Now we have reached the heart of this sacred knowledge. I'm going to reveal to you exactly how to apply the 3 secrets I've shared with practical examples that you challenge. It's showing him that you see his unrealized potential, that part of him that perhaps he doesn't even fully recognize himself. That wounds his ego, just enough to awaken his desire to prove his worth to you. A recent neuroscience study showed that when a man feels positively challenged by a woman he admires, his brain releases not only dopamine, but also vasopressin, a neurotransmitter associated with bonding and fidelity in mammals. It's literally a brain chemistry of love and devotion that is activated. Remember, the masculine ego needs challenges. When you offer him a challenge wrapped in genuine admiration, you create a perfect storm in his psyche. Now, to apply the paradox of presence, you must understand that it's not about games or manipulation. It's about honoring your own life and your mystery. Jung spoke about the importance of what he called individuation, the process of truly becoming yourself. In practice, that means that when that man enters your life, he should not find an empty space waiting to be filled by him. He should find a life already rich and meaningful in which he desires to earn a place. Stop responding to messages immediately, not as a strategy, but because you're really busy living your life. Cultivate mysteries and passions to which he doesn't have complete access. Have parts of your life that are only yours. A spiritual practice, a creative hobby, meaningful friendships. When he asks about those parts of your life, share them with enthusiasm, but don't try to convince him to participate or understand them completely. Allow it to remain a mystery to him. Neuroscience shows us that the male brain is especially activated by unsolved mysteries. They occupy his mental space and generate obsession. One of my clients, Sarah, who was a holistic therapist, had the habit of telling the man she was interested in everything about her day. Every detail, every client, every idea. I advised her to change that dynamic. The next time he asked about her day, I suggested that she smile mysteriously and say, "It was transformative. I had some profound revelations today. Maybe someday I'll tell you more about it." That small change generated a magnetic effect. Suddenly, he was asking more questions, wanting to know more, trying to enter that mysterious part of her life. She wasn't pretending. She was just choosing to cultivate a sense of sacred mystery around the profound aspects of her existence. And that brings us to the third and most powerful secret, the confrontation with the shadow. This is the deepest level of hurting the male ego in a way that awakens obsessive love. Jung believed that every human being has a shadow, those parts of ourselves that we repress, deny, or hide. For men, This shadow frequently includes vulnerability, the fear of not being enough, and the terror of not being respected. One of the most powerful ways to activate this level is through what I call reflected vulnerability. It's when you, with courage, first show your own vulnerability, creating a safe space for him to confront his own. For example, share one of your fears, an insecurity, something you struggle with, not in a dramatic way or seeking validation, but with a sacred tranquility. Something like, sometimes I fear not being enough, but I'm learning to embrace that part of me too. When you do this, in essence, you're saying, it's safe to show your humanity with me. You don't need to be perfect or invulnerable. Then, when he eventually shows his own vulnerability, perhaps by talking about a failure at work or a fear of rejection, you have the opportunity to wound his ego in the most transformative way possible. Don't console him immediately by saying that everything is fine or that he shouldn't worry. Instead, look him deeply in the eyes and tell him something like, "Thank you for sharing that with me. I see your struggle. I see your pain. And I also see your strength to face it. That's what I admire in you. Not your perfection, but your courage." What you're doing is denying his ego the empty consolations. And instead, you're honoring his battle, his path. You're essentially wounding his ego by not allowing him to hide behind false strength. But at the same time, you're offering him something much more valuable, the recognition of his true strength, that which emerges when facing his shadows. Neuroscience studies demonstrate that when we feel truly seen in our vulnerability, our brains release oxytocin, the bonding hormone, the same one that is released between mother and child or during orgasm. It's a primordial, deep bond, almost impossible to break. For a man, being seen in his deepest truth by a woman he admires creates a bond that goes far beyond physical attraction or compatibility. He literally becomes addicted to the feeling of being truly seen and honored by you. One of my clients, Amanda, applied this principle with a man who seemed incapable of commitment. For years, he had maintained superficial relationships, never allowing anyone to get too close. When Amanda created space for him to face his shadows, his fear of abandonment, his insecurity of not being enough, something extraordinary happened. He cried in her arms. A man who had never shown vulnerability finally found a sanctuary for his most hidden parts. 3 months later, he proposed marriage, not because she played or manipulated, but because she offered him something that no other woman had offered him, a mirror for his complete soul, not just for his acceptable parts. This is the true essence of what Jung discovered in his studies on the male psyche. The man doesn't just desire to be admired for his strength. That's superficial. At his deepest core, he desires to be seen in his totality, strength and weakness, light and shadow, and still be considered valuable. When you offer that to a man, you awaken in him not just love or attraction, but an almost sacred devotion, because you become not just a romantic partner, but a spiritual guide, a priestess who helps him integrate all parts of himself. What I'm sharing with you is much more than a set of techniques. It's a path of transformation, both for you and for the man you desire in your life. It's a knowledge that touches the sacred space between the feminine and the masculine, the ancestry that Jung studied deeply. By applying these principles, you're not just wounding the male ego to awaken love. You're offering him an opportunity for growth, integration, and healing. And in that process, you also transform yourself. Think for a moment. How many times have you dimmed your light so as not to outshine a man? How many times have you hidden your opinions, your desires, your power for fear of driving him away? The cruel irony is that by doing that, you probably drove him away. Still, the paradigm that Jung discovered is that the masculine truly yearns for the feminine in her full power. Not the diminished, softened, diluted feminine, but the ardent, mysterious, challenging feminine, who reflects not only his beauty, but also his wisdom, his discernment, his ability to see beyond appearances. When you learn to wound the male ego in the sacred way that I've shared with you, you're not only changing how he sees you, you're changing how you see yourself. You're reclaiming your power, woman. One of my clients, Jessica, was a successful executive who always minimized her achievements when she was near the man she was interested in. She was afraid of intimidating him. When she began to apply these principles, she not only conquered the love of that man, but discovered a new way of inhabiting her own power. For the first time, she told me, "I feel that I don't need to choose between being powerful and being loved. I can be both." This is the true revolution of this knowledge. It's not just about conquering a man. It's about reconquering yourself, your essence, your sacred fire. And here's the deepest truth. When you master the art of wounding the male ego in this transformative way, you become irresistible, not because you're playing or manipulating, but because you're acting from a place of authenticity and genuine power. Neuroscience confirms what Jung intuited. Men are biologically attracted to women who emanate authentic confidence. Studies show that testosterone levels, the hormone associated with male sexual desire and attraction, increase significantly when a man is in the presence of a woman who demonstrates self-respect and establishes clear boundaries. This isn't just psychology, it's biology. It's the male body responding hormonally to your feminine power. So, how to integrate all this knowledge into your daily life? How to transform this wisdom into a new reality for you? Begin with your relationship with yourself. Before applying any of these principles with a man, apply them in front of your mirror. Look at yourself and observe your unrealized potential. Honor your own mysteries. Confront your own shadows. This internal work is essential because you cannot offer a man what you haven't first offered yourself. Then begin to observe how you interact with the men in your life, not just romantically, but also with friends, colleagues, family members. Do you tend to please, to say yes when you would really like to challenge, to always be available, always pleasing? Begin to change these patterns gradually, not to manipulate, but to be more authentic, to honor your truth, your limits, your intuition. A client of mine began simply by saying, "I disagree," when she really didn't agree, instead of smiling and nodding as she used to do. That act of authenticity transformed the way men responded to her. Suddenly, her opinions were solicited, valued, and debated with respect. When you're ready to apply these principles with the man you desire to attract or reconquer, begin. Don't implement everything at once. Subtlety is your ally. Perhaps start with the paradox of presence. Cultivate areas of your life that are just yours. When he asks about your day, share with enthusiasm, but leave mysteries. It was a revealing day. I discovered something important about myself. When he asks what it was, smile and answer. It's a process I'm living through. Maybe someday, I'll tell you more. Not to provoke, but because some journeys are really personal, sacred, just yours. Then try the mirror of the soul. When he shares an achievement or a goal, don't just praise him, challenge him with love. That's amazing. And you know what I see in you? I see someone capable of going even further. There's something about you when you talk about this that shows extraordinary potential. And when you feel that the trust between you is growing, create space for the confrontation with the shadow, perhaps by first sharing a vulnerability of yours, a struggle, a fear, thus opening a portal for him to also show himself completely. When he begins to show signs of falling deeply in love with you, remember, this is not a power to be used lightly or selfishly. It's a sacred responsibility. The true purpose of wounding the male ego in this way is not to create dependency or a toxic obsession. It's to help him evolve, to integrate all parts of himself, to become a more complete and integrated man. Jung spoke about how true love isn't two halves completing each other, but two whole beings recognizing each other. When you apply these principles in the way I've taught you, you're not just conquering a man, you're helping him conquer himself. And in that process, you also free yourself. You free yourself from the need to dim your light, to hide your power, to be less than you really are in order to be loved. You discover that true love doesn't demand the sacrifice of your essence. On the contrary, it flourishes when you're totally in your power, totally in your truth, totally alive. This is the revolution that Jung initiated more than a century ago, and that today I place in your hands. A revolution, not just in love, but in consciousness. A revolution that begins when you recognize that wounding the male ego in the deepest and most sacred sense is actually an act of love both for him and for yourself. And so, my dear, you now possess a knowledge that few women have. You have the map of the labyrinth of the male psyche. You have the keys to awaken not just desire or attraction, but devotion, commitment, and a transformative love. As we reach the culmination of this profound journey into the architecture of desire, remember that what you now possess is not merely knowledge, it is wisdom. The wisdom to recognize that true power in relationships emerges not from manipulation, but from the courage to stand fully in your authenticity. The paradox Jung understood so brilliantly is this: when you learn to honor both your light and your shadow, to embrace your mysteries without apology, you become not just attractive, but transformative. You create a sacred space where a man can finally remove his armor and discover himself anew through your eyes. This is the ultimate alchemy, turning the base metal of conventional relationship dynamics into the gold of genuine connection. What we've explored isn't just about awakening devotion in another, it's about awakening to your own magnificent wholeness. The greatest seduction has always been truth. Not the comfortable truth that leaves us unchanged, but the challenging truth that invites us to evolve. When you embody this understanding, you don't just change how you're seen, you change how you see yourself. So take this ancient wisdom forward, not as a strategy, but as a philosophy. Use it not to conquer, but to heal. Use it to create relationships where both souls can expand into their fullest expression, where vulnerability becomes strength and separation transforms into profound union. The path is now illuminated before you. The revolution begins not tomorrow, but in this very moment, with your next thought, your next word, your next act of authentic self-expression. The question is no longer what you must do to be loved, but who you will become when you finally allow yourself to be fully seen.